The New Testament marked the beginning of the world Christian movement. It also marked the beginning of the age of the ministry of all believers. To miss this connection is to miss the plot entirely. The Old Testament saw select ministries such as prophets, priests, and kings endowed with the Holy Spirit to carry out divine activities within the nation. Nothing more was needed, as the worldwide ingathering of peoples and people into God's kingdom were only promises and prophecies awaiting the fullness of time when the promised Messiah would come. Moses' cry that all God's people would be suitably endowed awaited that fullness of time. Moses said, "I wish that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit upon them all," in Numbers 11:29. The New Testament was to experience a seismic shift in the outworking of God's purpose, from nations being attracted in to God's people going out. The cry of "Come" echoes loud and clear from the pages of the Old Testament. You can read in 1 Kings 8:41-43. While Jesus' commission to go echoes even louder from the pages of the New Testament. It was no coincidence, therefore, that Joel's prophecy was chosen by the risen Christ to inaugurate the church age. Written some 800 years before, this prophecy's time had finally come. The noise from the celebrations in heaven as Joel's prophecy finally burst onto the stage of human history must have been deafening. Acts 2:16-18 and verse 21. This is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. "In the last days," God says, "I will pour out my Spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your young men will see visions, your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my Spirit in those days, and they will prophesy." Then in verse 21, "And everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved." This initial outpouring of the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost was not on all people, as mentioned, but on all God's people. Every one of the 120 believers in the upper room had the Holy Spirit poured out upon them. Not one unbeliever was included. However, this outpouring upon God's people very soon resulted in 3,000 unbelievers being saved, and this figure quickly rose to 5,000, thus fulfilling the purpose of God's people being clothed with power from on high. And everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. The approach was clear. God would gather nations and people into his kingdom through his chosen redeemed people, not apart from them. The Holy Spirit would convict the world, all people, of sin, righteousness, and judgment, as Jesus mentions in John 16:8. But the communication of the gospel and the reconciliation of nations and people was entrusted to God's redeemed people. It was no coincidence that every nation was represented in Jerusalem on this occasion, and that the Holy Spirit came as a violent wind, an echo from Genesis 28, when God told Jacob his seed would be as dust and would spread out all over the world to bless the nations, from Jerusalem to Judea and to Samaria, and through ever-widening circles to the ends of the earth. Blow on us afresh, Holy Spirit. Come like a mighty windstorm, as it says in the New Living Translation, and scatter us like dust to the west, to the east, to the north, and to the south, that all peoples on earth may be blessed.